gentlemen, and welcome to the Book Review Talk Show. Today we will be looking at two very famous pieces of writing that are similar in terms of the story, but also different. Today we will be looking at The Great Gatsby, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, as well as Macbeth, the play of Macbeth, written by William Shakespeare. Both writers are outstanding and have almost like a special power that makes you intrigued, connected, and interested in the literature. Once you start reading either of these pieces of writing, you don't want to put it down. Anyway, today we will be focusing on the goals of Gatsby and Macbeth. We will talk about similarities, differences, and even just the general ideas both these characters have throughout the novel. You might be wondering why I said we. Well, today we are very lucky, and I have two special guests to introduce. But before we get to talking, let's go through a quick summary of key points and the actions throughout the writings that have to do with Gatsby and Macbeth trying to achieve their goals. What we're really focusing on today is how people can get so caught up into achieving their goals that they do things they normally wouldn't even do. First, we'll go over The Great Gatsby. It all started with Gatsby and Daisy meeting when they were young. Gatsby fell in love with Daisy quickly, but unfortunately Gatsby had to leave to serve his country in war. When Gatsby returned, Daisy already had a new life, but Gatsby couldn't take his mind off her, so Gatsby watched the light from Daisy's house every night as he lived right across the bay from her. Gatsby wants to get Daisy back, and the first step to doing this is running into her. So Gatsby threw a bunch of parties hoping that Daisy would show up one night. But instead, Daisy was at home, doing things like combing her daughter Pammy's hair and not getting treated the best by her husband Tom. After Gatsby throws a few parties, he realizes it isn't working, so he asks Daisy's cousin Nick, who is new in town, if he can set up a day for Daisy and him to have tea. After Gatsby asked nicely, Nick agreed to do it. Not long after, Gatsby and Daisy both hit it off after a little bit of awkward conversation, and Gatsby even takes Daisy to his house to show off. After this day of reconnecting, Daisy and Gatsby spend time together behind Tom's back. This makes Gatsby tell Daisy that she must get rid of Tom. Daisy doesn't end up getting rid of Tom, which leads to a fight between herself and Gatsby. This fight occurs while Daisy is driving, which distracts Daisy, leading her to run over a lady that Tom secretly is with on the side. Once Daisy hits her, she keeps driving as she is upset and doesn't look back. Now we'll take a look at Macbeth. Macbeth has just been named King of Cawdor by King Duncan, as he played a major role in helping Scotland defeat Norway in battle. On Macbeth's way back home, he runs into witches that tell him he will one day be king, but after, Banquo, a friend of Macbeth from war, son Fleance will become king after. The witches' words make Macbeth get wrapped up in his mind thinking about how great it would be to become king. Macbeth decides to take action rather than let fate decide, so he kills King Duncan. Macbeth becomes king, as Duncan's son Malcolm fled Scotland from fear of being in danger. Macbeth and his wife both feel bad for what they have done, but lie to keep themselves out of trouble and to keep themselves royal. Since Banquo was with Macbeth when he got information about the future, and since Fleance is to become the king after Macbeth, Macbeth sends murderers to kill them. Banquo is murdered, but Fleance escapes. Macbeth realizes that Macduff has suspicion on Macbeth, so Macbeth again sends men to murder Macduff, but Macduff is nowhere near to be found, so the men kill Macduff's wife and their son. Macbeth is so focused on achieving his goal, it's all he's thinking about, so he doesn't even care when his wife commits suicide. Malcolm and Macduff come back to Scotland with an army, so Macbeth tries his best to defend his position. He ends up killing young Siward in battle, but is killed by Macduff after, who is born not of man. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Now that we've went through a quick summary outlining the key parts of the stories where Gatsby and Macbeth try to achieve their goals, it's time to introduce our special guests. First, we have Jake Jeffers, who's a life coach, who used to be the life coach of Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and Barack Obama. Jake, pleasure to have you here.
How's it going, sir?
Awesome. And our next guest, oh wait, I'm getting something. Oh guys, unfortunately our other guest, Raphael, isn't able to make it today, so we're just gonna go on with the show. All right, so Jake, I know you have a great knowledge on both pieces of writing. Do you mind telling us your opinion and viewpoint of the goals of both Gatsby and Macbeth?
Yes, of course. I like to look at things from a cool perspective. So for this topic, I like to think about soccer because I'm a huge soccer fan. Personally, it's one of my favorite sports. See, the goal of soccer is to get the ball in between the posts and under the crossbar. It's easy to achieve this goal when the net is wide open and you're close to it. But as you back up, it's a little bit more tricky to get the ball in the net. Then, it gets even more difficult when there's a goalie because they're there to try and stop the ball from going in the net. And again, it makes it a lot more difficult having a goalie and being far from the net. So, how I feel is in The Great Gatsby, written by the fabulous F. Scott Fitzgerald, is that Gatsby, the main character, is in the position of being far away from the soccer net because it's a long shot. He had a connection with Daisy back in the past, but it won't ever be like that again. It's like her new life, which is with Tom and Pammy, who are the goalkeepers. It's almost impossible to get it in the net. Almost impossible for Gatsby to achieve his goals. Gatsby, when alone in the moment with Daisy, forgets that Daisy has a new life. Daisy has a family, and her family just can't disappear. Then, my thoughts on Macbeth's goals is that it's pretty easy at first. He starts off close to the net, easily achieving one goal after another and becoming king. But as he goes on, murdering and murdering and murdering many innocent people to cover up his tracks, it gets harder to keep his goal. The net becomes farther away, and there's a goalie even added to it. Maybe even some defenders. It gets hard to remain king. It's only a matter of time before he screws up. And one shot gets suspicion on him, which leads to his downfall. So, yeah, that's the way I see it.
All right, so that's a really interesting way you put that, Jake. So I recently conducted an online survey to find out what people were between Gatsby and Macbeth, whether their goals were different, similar, or a mixture of both. After obtaining more than 30,000 votes, I think I have found an answer to the question. Jake, after taking into account the result on this table, whether it is your point of view or I would say, why do you think that almost 50% of people would vote Gatsby and Macbeth are different but similar at the same time?
I will try to answer your question, but staying on time. Beginning with the similarity of both, Gatsby will have tried all his life to have the love who is known as Daisy, without ever realizing that when he returned from war, it was just not possible. This illusion of a man being stuck in a cave, but who is aiming for his light in the distance, realizes after several efforts that it was just a group of fireflies in a mass colony. The view of Macbeth's life is practically similar, with very little differences. Macbeth does not have the same dream as Gatsby, for Gatsby just wants the love of a special woman, where Macbeth wants to become king and continue to hold the power through this position. But both will not see their dreams come true. Again, moving back to differences, I think that the voters might have held that Macbeth was starting to spread terror in Scotland by killing whoever dares to oppose. However, Gatsby never raised his hand to anyone. Whoever interested him was Daisy.
Okay, so now that we know what you think the viewers and readers have thought about when doing the survey, we would really like to get your personal view on both Gatsby and Macbeth's goals and whose side you would lean toward on for their actions.
Okay, so I think it's a very obvious side to take in terms of who acted better. Obviously, it was Gatsby, because again, just like I mentioned, Macbeth murdered tons of innocent people to advance his political career. So he did all these murders just to stay where he is. Gatsby never killed or even harmed anyone reaching for Daisy. Yes, Daisy did hit Myrtle, and Gatsby kept driving with her and didn't really feel bad at the time because he was so focused on his goal, which was Daisy. But he didn't purposely plan this to happen. It's just something that unfortunately took place in the path of trying to fulfill his goal. When I think about Macbeth and Gatsby, according to their goals, I just like to focus on 3 almost like subtitles or even arguments. One of them is their actions, which I just previously stated, which is Gatsby being hands-off and Macbeth being hands-on. But the other 2 are, what is that they're reaching for, and how close were they to achieving their goal? So, for the last 2, let's start with what they were reaching for. Again, like I mentioned slightly in the last question you gave me, Gatsby has his whole plan. It is all for romance, for love, where Macbeth has already got love, and now he just wants money and power. When you think of it, it's funny because Gatsby has what Macbeth wants, and Macbeth has what Gatsby wants. Gatsby is rich, and everyone knows him. This is what Macbeth wants. But Gatsby wants what Macbeth has, which is a lady. Now we can look at how close they were and when they were close. Both characters were close toward the beginning, but it slips away as the story progresses. But again, this is in very different ways. Gatsby could have married Daisy if he didn't leave for the war, but when he returned from said war, there was no way he could ever get her back. Macbeth kills Duncan to become king and was comfortable in this position, but the witches trick to make him uncomfortable, which leads him to more mass murders and taking the lives of innocent people, making him move farther and farther away from his goal of staying king forever.
All right, thank you, Jake. All right, everyone, that's it for today. Thank you to our special guest, Jake Jeffers, for coming
Thank you
and
for having
sharing
me.
all of his views.
See you guys later.